Okay, I'm live. All right, same day. I'm back for a second one. Been sitting around since that earlier video, which I made on Facebook using their live stream. I'm now on YouTube Studio with my Floyd Bayne on the Issues channel, trying to get back into the swing of that. Some of you may or may not know this. YouTube suspended the Liberty Activist Media Network page back in April, and that was the page I was using to produce videos on YouTube. Now they have since reinstated it, but I'm going to start using my Floyd Bayne on the Issues page to produce the videos because there are other people on the Liberty Activist Network whom I do not wish to have lumped in with me and wind up having the page suspended again, harming them because YouTube doesn't like me. Does that make sense? Are you with me so far? Okay, so I am going to try this and see how it works. I hope it comes out okay. After my earlier video, it occurs to me, and as a teacher, as someone who loves history, teaches history, or should say taught history, it occurs to me that there's people out there who need to learn and they need to know this stuff. Now, I also mentioned in the earlier video that people who don't want to learn are not going to learn. Okay, I mean that makes sense. So with those people, I'm obviously going to be wasting my time. There may, however, be some of you out there who want to know and just don't know some of this stuff. And that's understandable to a certain degree. I mean, you don't know it because you haven't been taught it, or B, you're unlike me, you're not a history nerd, so you haven't read a lot about this stuff. So I figured, all right, what the hell? I'll go ahead and try to get this news out there. Maybe it'll help some people, maybe not. Share it. Feel free to share this with anybody that you think it will help. And certainly I can't cover everything in one video. If I did, we'd be here for 10 hours and nobody wants to watch a 10-hour video. So I'll try to do these in shorter versions over a period of time, covering different topics. Now, with the removal or pending removal of the Robert E. Lee Monument in Richmond, Virginia, the talk about that has been, racism, slavery. It's got to go. It's offensive. It offends people. Robert E. Lee was fighting to preserve slavery. Well, this is a good indication that they really don't know why Robert E. Lee was fighting or know anything about Robert E. Lee, except what they see on TV or what some activist or politician tells them to think. Because if he'd actually ever read any books about Lee, they would know better. So I'm going to just throw some stuff out there. You can dig deeper if you want to. If you don't want to, then, that's fine. Here's the key for me. If you want to remain ignorant about these things, and I don't say ignorant is a bad thing. I'm ignorant of a lot of things. I'm ignorant of quantum physics. So I don't go out there making posts about quantum physics and telling people, here's what you should do or here's how it should be done, blah, blah, blah. But if you're not willing to educate yourself on a topic, or specifically this topic, then if you have negative attitudes about it, towards the man, maybe you should just be quiet. Maybe you should further educate yourself so that you know what you're talking about. I mean, if you're going to jump into a conversation and make comments, make accusations, and act like you know what you're talking about, then maybe you should know what you're talking about. Okay? So, racism, monuments that should be done away with because they're offensive. And we can't have offensive statues and monuments that might hurt people's feelings out there. So basically what they're saying is we need to get rid of any and all monuments, because there's always going to be a monument or a statue that offends somebody, right? I mean, Barack Obama has statues to him in different places. I find that offensive. I don't like Barack Obama. But you know what I have never done and what I never will do? I have never said, get rid of them. They should tear those monuments down. And you know why I don't do that? Because I know there are people out there who do like those monuments and who do want to see them. And they have every right to. Just as I have every right to want Confederate monuments to stay in place. But see, I don't have the same rights that liberals have, right? Their rights supersede mine. So they get to have their monuments, but mine, nah, not so much. All right, so this is from the book, The Real Lincoln by Thomas J. DeLorenzo. And again, just some brief stuff here. This is on page 3 in the introduction. And I quote, Roy Basler, the editor of Lincoln's collected works, has written that Lincoln barely ever mentioned the issue of slavery before 1854. And even then, he did not seem sincere. Chapter 2 of his book explores the doubts that many others have also expressed about Lincoln's supposed commitment to racial equality. The average American who has not spent much time reading Lincoln's speeches, but who has learned about him through the filter of the Lincoln scholars. Now, that brief aside, let me stop there for just a moment. I've run into this before. Some of you may recall I ran against Eric Cantor in 2010 and 2012. And one of the first things I had to do, was go to Cantor supporters and tell them he's not the man you think he is. He says one thing. He says things in his speeches that appeal to you and that you like. But if you looked at his voting record, have you looked at the things he has actually voted for? And most of the people I talked to looked at me like, but he's the Republican and he's on our side. Yeah, except that he doesn't vote like a Republican. He talks like one. And isn't that what politicians do? They tell you what you want to hear and then do what the hell they're going to do anyway. So the same thing with Lincoln. People grew up with the quote-unquote Lincoln scholars telling them what a wonderful man Lincoln was. We've painted this picture of him now in American history as some sort of demigod to be worshipped. All right, back to the story. Will be surprised or even shocked by some of his words and actions. He stated over and over again that he was opposed to political or social equality of the races. He was not an abolitionist, but denigrated them and distanced himself from them. And his primary means of dealing with racial problems was to attempt to colonize all American blacks in Africa, Haiti, or Central America, anywhere but in the United States. Well, that sounds like racial equality, doesn't it? Hey, you guys go over there, all right? You go play right field. We don't want you over here. Chapter 2 of the book also shows the extent to which Lincoln's views on race were consistent with those of the overwhelming majority of white Northerners. White Northerners, not Southerners, Northerners, who discriminated against free blacks so severely that several states, including Lincoln's home state of Illinois, amended their constitutions to prohibit the immigration of black people into those states. Such facts raise serious questions about the extent to which racial injustice in the South motivated Lincoln and the Republican Party to wage a long, bloody war. All right, now that's, again, from this book. This isn't Floyd Bayne talking. This is about Lincoln, the real Lincoln, the stuff you don't get in your school textbook, the stuff that the activists aren't going to tell you. Hell, stuff that even people in the Republican Party continue to echo this crap about Lincoln. Oh, Lincoln, great president. Yeah, best president ever. Yeah, he saved the Union, blah, blah, blah. All you got to do is read a little deeper. So if we're going to get rid of monuments, here's my point. If we're going to get rid of monuments of people who were racist and who subjugated blacks, who didn't care about blacks, well, certainly Lincoln's got to go. That there's a big monument of him up in Washington, D.C. that we should probably get rid of, right? I mean, and this isn't coming from me. I mean, I'm just going by what I'm hearing from the left, from the woke social justice warrior crowd. If we're going to get rid of this stuff, then let's be consistent across the board, right? Now, another point that I want to make, and this is from another book, History of Slavery by Suzanne Everett. Now, this is just one of several books I have on the issue of slavery. And yes, I have read them. I don't just use them for paperweights. All right. So again, we're back to the issue of slavery. You can see behind me, Confederate battle flag, right? So that immediately makes me a racist, doesn't it? In the eyes of the left, in the eyes of Democrats, in the eyes of the woke crowd, I'm a racist simply because I have that flag there. Not thinking for one moment it might stand for something else, or it might have meant something else when it was originated. But again, you know, they don't think. There's no critical thinking involved. There's no looking at history and how things evolved and came to be. Slavery sucked. I don't know anybody who liked slavery. I did Civil War reenacting for 20 years. I've read about the history of the Civil War my entire life, continue to read about it, as I've told you. There's always something new to learn. And I have yet to talk to anybody who says, oh yeah, slavery was great. Black people should have been happy to have been slaves. In fact, we should reinstitute slavery. That'll be good for everybody. I don't know anyone like that. I don't know anyone who's ever worn a Klan outfit. I know somebody who may have dressed in one or at least did blackface. I mean, not personally, but I know who they are. But I don't know anyone like that. And I'm not trying to defend slavery. What I'm trying to do is point out to the woke crowd that slavery is not strictly a white thing, and not strictly B, a Southern thing. Okay? It's been throughout world history. It's from the first humans that set foot on this planet and came up out of the ooze and developed 2 legs and walked upright. There has been slavery. Every group on this planet, black, white, red, yellow, whoever they are, has enslaved somebody. Usually their own race. Usually through intertribal warfare. But again, those are things you learn when you read books like this. From the book. Are you with me? From the book. With hindsight, there seems to be a terrible inevitability about the emergence of the Atlantic slave trade and the beginning of slavery in the New World. That would be us, America. Its roots were embedded in antiquity, and its branches already stretched from the Western Mediterranean to China. Slavery was a fact of life that needed little justification from its protagonists, who were quite ready to embrace any source of wealth, political power, or social advancement. Given such attitudes, it is perhaps surprising that the trade did not get underway sooner. Black servants were, after all, a common enough sight in Europe. A Venetian named Gonzaga bought black boys, quote unquote, for the amusement of their court. And in Castile, black household slaves were mentioned as being well fed on kitchen leftovers. By 1492, when Columbus set foot in the West Indies, black slaves were being imported into Europe at the rate of 1,000 a year. And it goes on, and it describes the slave trade, not just the Atlantic slave trade, but slave trades in the Muslim world, slave trade in Europe, slave trades in China, in the Middle East. Slavery was everywhere. My point here is, if we're going to talk about reparations, if we're going to talk about getting rid of monuments and statues and buildings named after somebody, or a street named after someone, or somebody's book or somebody's letters, whatever, or some museum exhibit, where does it stop? I want you to think about that, Mr. and Mrs. Liberal, Mr. and Mrs. Leftist, Mr. and Mrs. Woke American. Where does it stop? What are we going to get rid of next? How much history are we going to just erase? I mean, do you ever stop and think about this stuff? Or for you, is it just about white people in the South? Is that all it's about? You know that the first slaves that came to the Americas were sold to or traded to slave traders by their own people, other black Africans. They would be captured in, again, intra or intertribal warfare. If they weren't killed outright, the young ones and the women were taken as slaves. Sometimes some of the men were kept as slaves. And when they came to realize that, hey, you know, there are these Europeans coming here wanting to trade for stuff with us, and we can give them these people we captured as slaves, and they're going to give us rum and fire sticks and all kinds of neat stuff, beads, colorful things. And all we got to do is give them a few of the people we captured in warfare. So you're going to seek reparations from your African ancestors? Which tribes are you going to go to and demand reparations? Be intellectually consistent. If slavery from hundreds of years ago is still affecting your life today, and it's that awful, that bad, that you can't get through the day without worrying about it, then who are you going after now? Think about it. Now, I'm going to wrap this up real quick with, well, real quick, as quick as I can. Robert E. Lee by Clifford Downing. Now, look, if you hear people talk, and you can go on Facebook and look at the news stations' Facebook pages, the Richmond Times-Dispatch page, where they've, produced a story about the Lee Monument coming down. And you see the comments by the usual suspects, the morons who, and I'm going to just call you what you are. You're a moron. You don't know anything about Robert E. Lee. All you know is that you've been told Lee was a Confederate general, so he was fighting for the South and he was fighting to keep slaves. Then if that's your belief, then you know nothing about the man. Is this the kind of man that you really think we should be tearing down his monuments and denigrating? Now, I'm going to tell you before I start reading this, it's about a page and a half. And it starts on page 635 of Dowdy's book. I'm going to try to get through it without getting too emotional. I'll try. But I have to be honest with you, when I read this stuff and I read about the kind of man he was, and I see the way he's talked about, denigrated today, it makes me angry. Yeah, it makes me real angry. All right. Let me see, where's the best place to start here? All right. This is after the war. And Lee has come to Richmond. He's on Franklin Street in the house there, right next to the Capitol Square. Some of you may know where this is. From the book, An amazing number of federal officers, that's Union officers, those are the people Lee was fighting against. An amazing number of federal officers came on one pretext or another, coming to his house to visit him. Some came, frankly, out of curiosity, to look at, talk to, perhaps shake the hand of the famous soldier. Unless he was resting upstairs in bed, Lee usually appeared and suffered their presence. Now imagine, you've just fought a 4-year war, and now all these people are coming knocking at your door wanting to talk to you. So yeah, I can imagine he probably got a little annoyed with it. One blue-clad visitor, an Irishman, was unmistakably an old line regular, as distinguished from volunteer soldiers. A regular was a guy who was in the regular U.S. Army. He wasn't a volunteer. Okay. Accompanied by a Negro bearing a large willow basket crammed to the brim with provisions. The old Army trooper said that he had served with Lee in the 2nd Cavalry and had heard that the colonel and his family were in want of food. As long as he had a cent, the Irishman said, his old colonel should not suffer. Now, 2nd Cavalry, 2nd U.S. Cavalry. This is prior to the war when Lee was in the U.S. Army, okay? And at that time, he was a colonel. So that's why the Irishman is still referring to him as the colonel. Back to the book. Hearing the conversation from the rear room, Lee walked into the hall. The old soldier drew himself up and saluted, with tears springing into his eyes. When Lee, deeply touched, assured the old cavalryman that he was not suffering for food, the soldier showed such disappointment that Lee accepted the basket to be distributed to the sick and wounded in the hospitals. Then the old trooper embraced his colonel and was only stopped from kissing him on the cheek by Rob and Dan Lee, Lee's nephew, recently of the Confederate Navy. The hardest category of visitors the door guard had to contend with was Confederate veterans on their way home. If Lee had seen them all, he would have made no progress in his recuperation. Occasionally, as with the old trooper from the 2nd Cavalry, he would come out after overhearing their conversations. Once, 2 emaciated soldiers appeared, saying they represented 60 more who were too ragged to come themselves. These men, these men owned a good house and farm in the mountains, and hearing the general was going to be indicted for treason, they came to offer him a sanctuary in their hills, where the Federals could be stood off forever. It was Lee who shed the tears when he came into the hall and said, "You would not have your general run away and hide. He must stay and meet his fate." And I'm going to stop there because, frankly, I'll just start blubbering if I read too much more. Does that sound like an evil man? Does that sound like the kind of man whose statues are to be denigrated, torn down, spoken ill of? I didn't get to the part about when he was at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. And at the end of the sermon, it was common in those days, and probably still is, for the preacher to call people up to the altar to receive communion and to profess their faith, or to ask forgiveness, or to ask for God to come into their life. And on this particular occasion, the only person who came forward up at this moment was an old black man and knelt at the altar. Well, of course, the congregation was aghast. Oh my God, it's a black guy. And nobody else moved forward except one person. Robert E. Lee. Now you tell me he's racist. I'm telling you, people need to think. That's about all I'm good for right now. I'll talk to you later.